Rewind of the Living Dead is a review show, so spoilers are ahead.
After his first screenplay, called Hereditary, started gaining traction in Hollywood, writer and director Ari Aster was approached by a Swedish production company interested in hiring him to develop a script for a horror film that would basically play out like a classic slasher movie. He didn't really have a way into that genre, but going through a breakup of his own gave him inspiration to tell a story about a fractured relationship on the verge of cracking up, a grief-stricken lead character searching for a family, and a boyfriend who is the exact opposite of what she wants and needs. Aster then set that dramatic story against the backdrop of a folk horror tale that takes place in Sweden after a group of college friends accept an invite to visit a commune filled with strange, interesting characters, bizarre rituals, and inevitably a horrific outcome.
What time is it?
9 p.m.
That can't be right. The sky is blue.
This is what 9 p.m. is like here.
Welcome and happy Midsummer.
Unbelievable.
Let our feast commence.
It's like they're trying to make it gross.
What are they playing?
Skin the Fool.
Skin the Fool.
So we just gotta ignore the bed.
It's a bear.
Dude, of all the things to let me sleep through.
That sounds fun.
In the latest episode of Rewind of the Living Dead, we're going to crown our May Queen and put on a bear suit as we review the 2019 film Midsommar. Welcome back to Rewind of the Living Dead. I am Damon Martin.
And I am the May Queen, Damon, Patrick Guerra.
If you would subscribe to our YouTube channel right now, you would actually see Patrick is in a bear suit.
That's right.
So today, Patrick, we are reviewing one of the most infamous films on this entire podcast history. The 4 years we've been doing this, going back a long ways, we're going to review Midsommar. And if it's been well documented. I've kind of like two films I've openly mocked on this show have been Halloween Ends, which really deserves it, and Midsommar. It's kind of like my other running joke on this show when I mention movies that either don't make sense or frustrated me or whatever the case may be. I've kind of used Midsommar as my other beating post to go along with Halloween Ends.
It's really interesting, Damon, that Midsommar is a movie about these two people in a very toxic relationship that can't seem to get away from each other, and then they end up in this world together and discover a whole lot of things about themselves. There's a parallel here. You're in a toxic relationship with Midsommar, and you have been for the entirety of this podcast. When you want to bring up a movie that you absolutely despise, Midsommar just like jumps right off your tongue. But you can't seem to wrest yourself from it for some reason. You're not unlike Danny and Christian. You seem to always be with this movie. So it was so important that I think we, as a podcast, finally went, let's fucking talk. Let's work this shit out. Let's work this relationship out. Are we breaking up? Are we making up? What are we doing today, Damon? Because Midsommar, I think, is it's a really important movie in that it sort of reignited this genre that maybe didn't have a name necessarily before it, but it's the good for her genre. You're familiar with this idea, right?
Oh, yeah, of course. Yeah.
The good for her genre is basically, women who are in bad situations, and at the end, instead of becoming a final girl, they get their lives back. In however which way they end up getting it. Sometimes they get it back in like a very crazy way, and sometimes they just get it back in a very cathartic way. Damon, let's start from the beginning. let's start with the first time you went to go see this movie. I'm assuming you saw it in the theater. I know I did.
I did. So just a quick backstory. So at this point, so Hereditary comes out in 2018. I've been a major cinephile for many years, but when it came to like films like this, it wasn't I wasn't always running out to see it opening weekend necessarily. I always saw them outside of like major franchises, like when there was a new Scream film, which obviously at this point there hadn't been a Scream film for like 7 years, but I would run to the theater to see those kind of films, but these films I was like I'll see them when I see them, but I would eventually see them in the theater. Now the difference with Midsommar was I was actually in Chicago covering a UFC event in my normal day job as a mixed martial arts journalist. I was in Chicago and I was staying at an Airbnb, and I had never stayed in an Airbnb before. It was someone's, like, basically they had like a section of their house roped off for me to stay in, but it was still really unsettling to just be staying in these people's houses where I would like come downstairs and they were like in the next room over just like chilling. And so like I really like every opportunity I had to get the hell out of there and not be at that Airbnb. Like they were the nicest people. There was nothing creepy about it. Like they were but I was just like, this is just so weird. It's like being in a strange relative's house. Like you feel uncomfortable the entire time. So as soon as I realized that was my situation, I was like, all right, I got to get out of here. I cannot stay in this place like more than I absolutely necessarily have to be here. So it was Friday night, and for those familiar with UFC events, they always have the weigh-ins are on Friday, the events on Saturday. So after the weigh-ins are done, I pretty much have Friday evening to myself. After I do all my work, I'm pretty much free for the rest of the night. So I went and got some Chicago pizza from Lou Malnati's, and I was like, you know what? There's a theater in this neighborhood. Oh, they're showing Hereditary. I heard a lot about this movie. So I sat down and watched it, and it genuinely freaked me out. Like, and we've reviewed Hereditary on this show, and I was like, damn, like I didn't see that coming. Like I didn't know much about it. I just heard it was good, so I went and saw it, and I was like, damn, that was impressive. So when I heard that Ari Aster had his second film coming out called Midsommar, I was like, all right, I'm in. Florence Pugh, I like her. Okay, I'm in. Will Poulter, I knew him a little bit. I was like, okay, I'm in. Let's go see this. Sat down in the theater, Patrick. About 3 hours later, walked out, and I was like, what the fuck what just happened? Like, what is this? Like, what is going on over here? It was just so long and drawn out, and I wouldn't go as far as to say nonsensical. It just felt like it was long for the sake of being long, and there was a lot of scenes that just felt really excruciatingly, overtly long. Like the entire movie was long, but there were just certain scenes where it's like, okay, you're just dragging this out. And I'll be honest, like at the time, I wasn't the biggest folk horror fan, which is what this is. I had seen Wicker Man, I'd seen a couple other movies, but not that I disliked the genre, I just wasn't really into it. And then I think number one, the thing that frustrated me most about this movie were the ludicrous decisions that continuously got made throughout the film, and it was just so utterly frustrating. And after 3 hours of sitting in the theater, the movie's 2.5 hours long with trailers and everything, it's like 3 hours. By the time the movie was over 3 hours later, I was like, man, fuck this movie. That's pretty much how I walked out of the theater at the time. So that's my backstory of Midsommar. Is it's like the movie that became the antithesis of overly long, drawn out, and not totally coherent horror movies at the time.
No, I mean, I do think at the time, and I kind of have a similar trajectory with Midsommar myself, because I remember rushing out to go see Hereditary because I'd listened to an interview with Toni Collette, who I respected just as an actor in general, and I was like, man, she's in this what looks like a super intense horror movie. So I ran out and saw it with my brother, and I was like, holy shit, like that was fucking wild. Like whatever the fuck that was. And then you can listen to our podcast on Hereditary and get our thoughts on that. But it did make me like very curious for whatever Midsommar was going to be. And then I go to Midsommar and it is a folk horror. and I go, oh, okay. Like I'm not in love with the folk horror genre myself either. Some people love that stuff, and I watch those and I just go, okay, these are kind of just movies that happen to take place with weird like pagan groups, and that's kind of what this movie is. Like he wasn't necessarily reinventing the wheel, but I did think he made improvements on it, because I do think, and especially after this rewatch and having watched Beau is Afraid earlier this year, another Ari Aster film, that Ari Aster is a very unique director. I think, and what I what I enjoy about the guy is he's very like kind of down to earth. He's just sort of nerdy and a bit neurotic, and he just kind of wants to make his thing the way he wants to make it, and it does stand out. It does make a difference. I mean, the fact that people are still to this day talking about Midsommar is a testament to his attention to detail and what he put into the movie. It's a movie that is like generally beloved by women. A lot of women really love this movie. It's Ariana Grande's favorite movie of all time, and she had a Midsommar themed birthday party. My wife loves it. She watches it a lot, actually, and most of my rewatches have just been kind of passing by as the movie is on. But I wasn't like blown away by Midsommar, and I just went, oh, okay, that's good. And then I did my research on it, and I read up on it, and I realized that indeed, like you said in the intro, this was a commission job for Ari Aster. This Swedish producer reached out to him because the Swedish Board of Tourism wanted a movie that would get people to want to go to Sweden. And weirdly enough, I remember coming out of the theater and I'd seen it, and my wife, as she does, asks, what'd you think? And I go, it makes me want to go to Sweden. Like, it worked. Whatever sort of fucking subliminal messaging in that movie they did, it worked. I was like, yeah, we should go during the summer. It looks kind of nice. Let's go do a pagan ritual. It seems like it's kind of fun. But Damon, here we are now. We've kind of rehashed what was. And now here we are in the present. And this is my first honest rewatch of Midsommar in quite some time. And I'm just going to lay out my thoughts to you right now. This movie's better than I remember it. It truly is. I look back on it now, and it is long, but it's intentional. And obviously, I think what everybody loves to talk about is this is a breakup movie. And I remember my original impressions of this movie were like, it's just a couple of annoying fucking people that need to break up already. But now, watching it intently for this podcast with our now trained brains, I went, wow, this is actually a very intricate movie that has a lot to do with toxic relationships and a lot to do with like being completely stuck in one, and then being handpicked being handpicked because of your toxic relationship to go through a certain level of hell as a team, as a duo. And I think atmospherically, this is less of a horror movie than I thought it was. It's really a relationship movie. Now I see it on the second intent watch. I go, this is indeed a relationship movie. And it sort of shows the price you pay for not getting out of a toxic relationship. On the horror aspect of it, it actually, like I said, it's less of a horror movie to me, but that doesn't mean that it isn't laced with dread, but it's laced with like Ari Aster dread, like uncomfortable nudity. He's big on that, and he's good at it. Also, this atmospheric idea of like when they're at this commune in Sweden that their friend Pelle brought them to, it's always bright. It's always sunny. Sometimes it's overexposed. It's so bright. That's a bold swing to just go, let's do this as brightly as possible and still see if we can make it creepy. And it was fucking creepy. And I've hung out in Sweden. They're creepy. They're not Dutch creepy, but they're kind of creepy. And so like it was reflective of that. I found it to be to ride the line of like fantasy and reality. Like I was like, oh, this feels anthropologically like it makes sense, but it's just over the line into ridiculous, but ridiculous with intent. because I think you and I can agree that like some of the older folk horror movies, they're not they don't grab you. There isn't something on that's like holding on. There's a couple that are, but this one grabs you, and I think it's probably because it's told from the sensibilities of an American as opposed to typically folk horror movies. Usually, the ones I've seen come from England or come from surrounding European countries. So it was interesting to see it laced with sort of an American sensibility. So I think it had a different punch for me this time. But enough about me, Damon. Here we are. Finally, I need to get your thoughts. What on earth do you feel about Midsommar now that you have revisited it for this podcast?
So first off, I want to throw this out there to the audience. Like, be clear, we are in full spoiler mode. The movie's 4 years old, so we're not hiding anything. Just so like I'm not putting that away. So I'll be honest. I sat down to watch this movie, and I already had a bias going in. I try not to do that, but it's just a reality. I had such a bad taste in my mouth from seeing it the first time in the theater. And I was just like, all right, here we go. Let's just get into this. Let's just see what it's all about. Like, let's just trudge through it. It was like it's like when you have a job you don't want to do, right? You're like, oh, I got to clean out the gutters. All right, here we go. So that was kind of my impression going in. So I sat down and I started the movie. And right away, some of the same criticisms I had 4 years ago still stuck out in terms of really bad decision making by the characters, especially in moments when your instinct should have been in a fight or flight moment to fly, get the fuck out. There's still a lot of those that bug me, that I'm just like, why would you not run? Like, you may not get away, but at least try, because there's so many red flags in this movie where I'm just like, again, it becomes a little like, we all have to suspend disbelief watching horror. And we all know the tropes and the jokes about, you run up the stairs and set out the front door, the screamisms, things like that. But we all accept some of them as like, that's just horror movies, right? But this to me is like what they call, I know it's a term I absolutely hate, but it's a word that gets used, elevated horror. Elevated horror, and elevated horror, you expect them to be a little different, right? Like, they're not going to be the same old horror tropes. Like, Hereditary breaks the rules in a lot of ways, that way that film plays out. Midsommar does as well in certain things, but the decision-making still drove me insane. There were scenes, particularly some of the trippy scenes where they're on mushrooms or other herbs or whatever else they're doing there. I'm not a huge fan of psychedelic trips in movies. And the reason I say that is because I've done psychedelic trips myself, and every time I've ever done it, it's wildly different from the previous one. I've not done it a lot. I'm not going to sit here and say I'm a tripping expert, because I'm certainly not, mostly in college. But every experience was different, and I always have a weird relationship with movies that try to depict what it's like to be on a psychedelic, because I don't know. I just like everybody's experience with that is different, and it's weird to me. Like, oh, this is what you're telling me it is, if that makes sense. So you're telling me,
it's weird to interpret it.
Yeah, and it's just, I don't really enjoy it in any movie, to be honest. Like, the only movie where I like a psychedelic trip, and it's not really psychedelic, is The Big Lebowski, when he gets knocked out of Jackie and he goes through that whole thing, which is hilarious. But other than that, I'm just not a big fan of movies depicting to me what a psychedelic trip should be like. I know it's a weird thing, but it just bugs me.
That is a weird thing.
And then, as I said, some of the scenes were still excruciatingly long. Like, there were so, like, certainly not an editor, certainly not going to tell Ari Aster how to envision his own films, because I like his work. But there were definitely scenes where I'm like, you could have cut out 5 minutes here. You could have cut out 3 minutes here. You could have, there's just moments where it's like, it's a 2.5 hour movie. 2 hours was enough to tell this story. It didn't really need that extra half hour. And a lot of that's just like the rituals and the dance.
Yeah.
And some of that could just carve it down a little bit. And I think that coming out of it was what made me feel like it was so long, because some of those scenes are so drawn out. It's just like, come on, move on with the story here. And you just wanted to get going. Now, I've now talked about the similarities of my past experience and my new experience with Midsommar. Here's where you're going to get your hat blown off and be shocked what I'm about to say, Patrick.
I'm holding on to the hat.
Outside of those irritations, which I've had with movies I've loved, I rewatched it and I was like, you know what? This movie's actually not bad.
Holy shit.
I was drawn into a couple different things this time that I just think I wouldn't say I ignored, but I didn't quite get into the first time around. One, you mentioned it. This is a relationship story. It's not a horror film. I mean, it is. It's a horror film.
Sure.
But it's a movie. It's a movie built around a bad relationship that should have ended. Toxic relationship, as you call it. It should have ended. When I went into this, knowing what I knew coming out of Hereditary back in 2018 going into 2019, I was of the mindset that I was getting a horror movie. And this is a horror movie to a certain extent, but this is also a movie about a fractured, damaged, broken relationship. And also a fractured, damaged, broken woman, being Florence Pugh's character, Danny. For some reason in my head, I didn't remember how horrific the death of her family was until I rewatched it. And I was like, I don't know if I just blanked that out or it just didn't hit me in the theater at the time. I don't know what it was, because that's early in the movie, and that's before I'd really gotten to the point that really started bugging me about this movie. But I think it's because so much of that later film bothered me when I saw it the first time that I kind of forgot about it in a way. I knew the event happened, but I'd kind of forgotten. When I rewatched it, I was like, that is so horrific. Like, that is, like, that really got me this second time around. I was like, holy shit. And then what really drew me in, and you're going to laugh when I say this, we talk all the time about characters and how you have to make your characters not only relatable, but you have to give us a reason to like or hate them in a movie. They can't just be vanilla. You know, you have to add something to make us care about whether they live or die, right? I remember, I texted you when I was watching this. I was like, I remembered rewatching this thinking, what a dog shit, horrible boyfriend Christian is to Danny, who is dealing with this awful tragedy in her life, and just a shithill he is. I remembered that. But then I kind of forgot about the other friends and like the other situations that happen once they get to the commune, including Christian, how just terrible they are. Like so in a way, I appreciated this more on a rewatch because I was straight on hate watching to like see these characters die. I know that sounds weird, but like I was just like, man, I can't wait for Christian to get burnt alive as that bear. Like I was waiting for it. Josh was a different character. I didn't hate Josh. He was kind of like the one seemingly, normal, nicer guy. And then, of course, Mark was a total douchebag, frat bro kind of guy. But I realized how much I hate these characters, but in a way that made me want to root for them to get theirs in the end. And when it all played out at the end of the movie, I walked away and I said, it's still too long. It is. And they still make some really bad, dumb decisions. Like, as soon as people start going missing and they can't explain it, get out. Like, just leave. Walk. I don't care. Just leave. Get out. And that's a frustration of just, my watching a horror film and characters making bad decisions. But outside of that, I was like, I feel like I understand this movie better. I understand what we're seeing it from Danny's perspective now and the atrocities she's dealt with and the toxic relationship she needs to get away from. And that's really what that final scene was to me, was purging that relationship when they give her the choice, him or somebody in the commune that you're going to put in this burning building. Sure enough, Christian goes in there in the bear suit in a paralyzed state where he's obviously going to be tortured when he dies. And I was like, you know what? Good for you, Danny. I'm proud of you. And so at the end, it was almost like a cathartic experience where I was expunged by the fire, Patrick, where I walked away and I said, you know what? It's not that bad. There are actually good moments. Again, I still have some criticisms, the length of the movie being the big one, and then again, the choices they make. But I understood it better, and I appreciated it more. And I walked away saying, damn, Patrick's going to be shocked when I come out of this movie and I'm not just ripping it to shreds. I'm actually saying compliments. I'm actually saying the quiet part out loud. I kind of liked it.
Damn it, it's incredible. I wasn't sure how you were going to come out of this one. You did assure me that when you said, I'm going to come in as fair as I can because I know how you can be. You're a bulldog sometimes. You're like, fuck this shit. And I'm like, he really fucking hates this movie. But, and truth be told, like, it was not like I was in love with this movie to begin with, but I appreciated it more this time around. And I'm realizing now, even with Hereditary, which when we did our podcast on it, we agreed that if we had been doing the podcast that year, that would have been our horror film of the year. That would have been our top horror film of the year. I think what is slightly interesting, but also frustrating about Ari Aster's movies is that they get better on the second watch. The experience that he brings you on is very weird and uncomfortable. You talk about the really lengthy rituals. Like, he really sat you in those rituals. In this second viewing, I was like, you know what? That's what it feels like being an outsider. You're like, when does this shit end? No one's explaining anything to me. It's boring. Like, I was kind of in the shoes of our American anthropology students and Danny in those moments. I was like, yeah, this fucking kind of sucks. Like, I don't want to be in this. But it felt foreign, and they're speaking in different tongues, and sometimes you don't know exactly what they're saying. Sometimes they don't always put the subtitle down to signify like what's going on. Like, again, super intentional filmmaking. So I'm like, okay, that makes sense. You talk about the bad decision making. Well, it's baked into these characters. Because normally, you and I agree on this, like, bad decision making, like, it takes a tactful filmmaker and storyteller to sell that. And a lot of older horror films, the decision making is just bad, and so it comes off as goofy, and you just go, okay, well, I'm just waiting for the moment where somebody's head explodes. In this movie, the bad decision making is baked in from the beginning. Because Danny and Christian, by the way, Danny played by the great Florence Pugh, Christian played by the great Jack Rayner. They are deep into a relationship that is beyond repair. And when you bake that in, that first act of the movie, by the way, which takes place almost exclusively at night, if I'm not mistaken, in the darkness, Danny should not be anywhere near Christian. Christian is this apathetic coward. He's a coward. He doesn't want to be with Danny at all. He doesn't know how to tell her, I'm done. Danny is just toxically codependent. And then the tragedy strikes. Then her sister kills herself and her parents. So she suffers this just devastating tragedy. And all she has in life is Christian. And there's this great scene, like, where he's walking to go see her after finding out the news, and the look on Jack Rayner's face in that moment is like, I really don't want to do this. And you go, fuck that guy. What a fucking piece of shit he is. But also, he hasn't wanted to do this for like over a year. He hasn't wanted to be with her, and now he knows he's locked in because he knows he can't walk away from a woman who has just suffered a terrible tragedy. He will be confirmed biggest shitheel on the planet if he does that. So they get locked in by this tragedy. They get locked into each other when she definitely should have kicked him to the curb, and he definitely should have told her a long time ago to walk away. Now they can't. Now they're stuck together. And then the friends, Josh played by William Jackson Harper, Mark played by Will Poulter, and Pele played by Wilhelm Blomgren. They don't even like Danny. They're the friends who hate Danny. And I love the scene, Damon, where they're talking about the trip, and they go, "Why the fuck would you invite her? What are you doing?" Like they're all like pissed off. And then she comes in the room, like, they're like, "Hey, it's so great that you're coming." Like, how fucking real is that, Damon?
Yeah,
like,
it's so real.
It's so real, because we've all done this where we're just like, oh, dude, why are you with that girl? Like, you guys hate each other. You make everybody miserable. Oh, hey, Denise, how you been? Oh, shoot. Like, everybody's done that. Everybody's done it.
It's
and
like
so it was
It's like the TikTok. There's a TikTok out there where a guy calls his best friend and plays a joke that he broke up with his girlfriend. Really, he got engaged. He calls him. He's like, "Hey man, me and Sophia broke up. We're finally done with her." And he, on the other end, his friend's like, he's like, "Oh my god, thank God I couldn't stand that bitch. My God." They're both standing there, stunned silence, like, "Yeah, actually, we were joking. We got engaged."
It's just, but my point to all that is that what this dark time that Ari Aster kind of hones in the first act of the film is a bunch of people who are gutless and can't make decisions for themselves. And there's a little detail which I noticed right off the top, and I'm sure you did too, is that there's this tapestry right at the beginning of the movie. The opening frame is a tapestry that basically just outlines the main acts of the movie and shows you how this thing is going to go. The one thing I picked up on this time, Damon, that I didn't pick up on the first time I intently watched this, because the first time I intently watched this, I didn't know what was going on, is that in every scene, there's this little guy kind of hanging out with a pen and pad, watching everything. Who's that little guy, Damon? You know who it is.
Huh? The little guy.
There's a little guy in the tapestry.
Oh,
I mean, I say little, but he's the same size as everybody else. But there's a guy hanging out in every scene, looking at them and writing intently on a piece of paper or drawing or doing something. Do you know who that guy is?
who is it?
That guy's Pele.
Yeah.
Pele is the villain of the film. That was a great reveal this time around.
That he drew all these people in, and he was the one setting them up from the very start. Him and the other guy too. The other guy who brought his American friends. They were setting them up to be the sacrificial lambs. And it's funny you mentioned that, because I again, first time around didn't really catch it, but there's a great moment when I think it's the other guy, Pele's counterpart in the group, where he's walking his two friends around the commune when they first get there, and they're like, "Is no one going to mention the bear?" And he's like, "It's a bear," and like they're so blasé about it. But like that moment was kind of like where in my head is a well-thinking character. I'm like, get out, like right then. Mm-hmm. But the way he says it's so blasé just tells you how fucked you are in that moment. Like there, when you see a bear in a cage, in this little tiny cage, and he's like, "Oh, it's a bear."
Yeah.
And you're just like, what? It was that, and same thing when you mentioned with Pele, when he's like talking to Danny, like he's telling her that Christian's a shitheel. Mm-hmm. He has that great moment where he says, "Do you feel like you're home with him?" And she can't acknowledge that she has never felt at home with him. They've just been, when they first get introduced in the commune, and they're like, "Oh, how long have you been together?" And he goes, "Oh, about 3.5 years." She's like, "It's actually been 4. Like, that's a big detail to forget about a relationship. I'm quite sure if you told your wife, like, she's like, "It's our anniversary," and you're like, "Oh, awesome, we've been together for 5 years." She's like, "What the fuck are you talking about?" Like, that's a pretty big detail. Like, you forget how long you've been with your girlfriend, and it's been 4 years. He's like 3.5, and she's like, "Actually, it's 4." And he's like, "Oh, okay." Like,
yeah.
And Pele calls him out on it. Like, Pele's full on, like, do you realize? Like, he says it without saying it. He's basically sitting there going, like, "You do realize that Christian is a shitheel." Like, that's
yeah. But Pele, excuse me, Pele and Ingmar, they targeted people who could not see red flags if you smacked them in the face with them.
Yeah.
They go, "These guys are perfect." He knew Danny and Christian were perfect for him because they could not see a red flag at all. They had no ability. And there is a, there's a director's cut. You're very aware of that. Yes, it is a longer movie, Damon, interestingly enough. But there was a scene, and I watched it, and it was a scene at the lake. Have you by chance watched these directors?
I did not, only because I didn't want to. I only wanted to watch the version I saw in the theater, so I'd have the same impression of the movie from first to second time viewing it.
And I did the same thing, but afterwards I went and sought out any deleted scene I could find, and there was one I found, which was at this lake. And indeed, in that moment, you got a little bit more clarity, because in that moment, this is after the very famous cliff jumping scene where Danny watches these people jump to their deaths. Obviously, for her, that's intensely triggering. She's fresh off of the death of her family, so there is a scene that night at the lake where she goes up to Christian and is like, "We need to get the fuck out of here." Like, she actually figures it out. She goes, "We need to get the fuck out of here. Like, why are we here?" And Christian just replies, "I'm staying. You can go if you want to go. Go ahead." Like, but I'm staying because now I'm going to do my thesis here. And in that moment too, he actually he says something to the effect of like, yeah, and I told Josh, but now he's trying to steal my thesis too. Like, he's still being a shithead, even though he knows Josh was trying to do it, right? So he's proving his shitheel-ness very well in this moment. But he finally he puts his foot in the ground and goes, "I'm staying. You can go if you want to go." And you know what she says in response? She says in response, "Don't you love me anymore?" Like, total toxic bullshit.
Yeah.
Like, total toxic bullshit. He gave her the out that she desperately needed. And he said, "I'm staying, you can go." And she still went, "Don't you love me anymore?" Like, she tried to keep him in. And you go, oh, wow. Like, truth be told, I'm glad the scene was cut because I think it was a way too expository. It had a much more, it didn't feel like the rest of the movie. It felt like it was too much like, we're explaining in this moment what's happening. But it was indeed like this kind of doubling down of like, you two are helpless in this moment. There's nothing that either one of you can do. You are the targets. You are the targets of this. Oh, and in that moment too, she brings up to him. She goes, "Why do you think they're like letting us watch all this stuff so you can report on it with your thesis? They've been doing this for centuries. They don't, if it gets reported on, it'll get shut down. They don't want us to report on it. We don't get to leave." Like, she could see the forest from the trees in that moment, but she got sucked back in with the idea of like, wait, but Christian, you can't leave me.
Yeah.
And so like you were just like, oh shit, yeah, these are doomed characters. We've done it a couple of times. There's a couple of other movies that we've talked about where the characters are doomed from the start. And that is very much the characters in this movie. They're doomed from the start. Even the side characters, even Mark, played by Will Poulter, that's the most obvious doomed character everywhere. He's sort of a frat boy douche. You know, he just wants to get laid by some Swedish chicks and he wants to do drugs and whatever. Like, you just know he's out. You already know he's out. And Josh, who seems the most centered, what does he do? He steals the book. Or he steals photos of the book after being very clearly told you cannot do that. So he's not respecting the process either, so he pays the price. Those ones are easy. But I appreciated more this time around understanding why Christian and Danny pay the prices that they pay. It became so much clearer this time around. And then all of the weird, like, ritualistic, like, unraveling of their relationship, I appreciated more this time around.
While I do understand the inclination to say, like, that scene is too expository and it just goes too far in that moment, there is part of me that wishes, because I haven't seen it, there is part of me that wishes they had at least left in the part where she says, "We need to go."
Right.
And he says, "You can go, I'm staying." For two reasons I wish that was in there. One, it would have at least, like, put me at peace knowing that someone understands what's happening. Because it's not like they're beating you up, like, with a hammer and a mallet in that community. They're telling you that you're in danger. They're telling you this is not going to end well. And you just seem oblivious to it. The fact that anyone would have said, maybe we should not be here.
Yeah.
Like, I understand even the moments when they, like, hand Christian the psychedelic drink and he's just like, "I don't want to have a bad trip." Like, he's trying to get out of it, but then like, "Oh, no, you'll like it." And he's like, "Okay." I get that. I understand that in that moment, because even after everything you've seen, there's still something kind of internally built in us where we're like, we don't want to be rude to the people who are welcoming us into their homes, right? It's like when you go to someone's house and they're like, hey, I made dinner. Here's what we're having. And in the back of your mind thinking, I have no desire to eat liver and onions. That sounds disgusting to me, but it's a little, but when you're in their house, you have to kind of like grit it and choke it down because you're food, not eating this elaborate dinner they made for you. Kind of that. I get that. I get those moments. But the fact that none of them, Mark's an idiot. Like, Mark's a moron.
Right.
I get him. He's just, as you said, he's a horny guy thinking he's going to get some Swedish ass. That's all he's thinking about. Josh, again, I kind of understand a little bit because obviously he's there to do his thesis. But even he's got to start, like, at some point, you got to start seeing some of the red flags raising up around you. This isn't just a normal commune with rituals, okay? And again, as you said, Christian is a coward. And in a way, he's trying to get away from Danny by being there. But the fact that Danny continued to stick around, okay, let's boil it down to her. The fact that none of these characters raised any red flags still bugs me because, again, there's some pretty obvious, even for Mark as a moron, there's some moments where you're like, dude, like, get out. Same thing with Josh. Like, I'm there to do a thesis. Guess what? I wrote a senior thesis too. I knew better. Like, I would know better than to, like, you know what? I'm not going to stick around for this. Christian, again, same kind of thing. Danny was obviously the one who was not there for the same purposes as everybody else. She was there to be drawn to Christian and trying to repair whatever was left of their fractured relationship. I wish that scene had been involved because then at least if she doesn't leave, I knew that she had it in her head. You know, they at least said they at least said it out loud to say, something's not right here. We need to go. And then his response being, I'm staying, you can go. That's the old, like, you know, we're in a fight in the car. You pull your girlfriend's like, pull over, let me out of the car. And you're like, no, there'll be none of that. That's the part where you get out. He's telling you leave. Like, that's an old Eddie Murphy skit, by the way. That old thing I just did is one of my favorites. He's telling her, I don't want you here. Go. I don't give a shit. And because of how alone she's felt, especially in the wake of her family's death, she's clinging on to the last thread of her life right now. And that is Christian. For better or worse, that's Christian. And if they had just said that in that moment, I would have been like, damn, I wish she would have gotten out, but I understand why she stayed. So in my criticism would be, Patrick, that would have, I wouldn't say it would have totally changed everything I thought about the movie the first time around, but at least that part would have gotten to, because that was one of the things that bugged me the most about the movie coming out of it, was like they all made remarkably dumb decisions. And so many red flags got raised and they never acknowledged them. They kind of did, but they never really did. And they just like, oh yeah, like, you know, girl comes and picks you out of your bed and we're going to go in the woods. Of course I'm getting some, you know, like everything. Right. You shouldn't photograph this thing. You got, you know, all these little things, the choices they make, some of them make sense, but just the larger picture, you got to know to get out of there. And the fact that Danny at least would have acknowledged that would have at least given me that perspective of saying she wanted out, but I understand why she stayed. So I wish they had injected that a little, because again, at least then I understand because I understand her motivations for being there. That I understood without that scene. But at least if she would have acknowledged being like, we need to go, because no one says that. No one ever thinks like, except for the other couple.
Right.
Like, we need to go. Like, we got to go. And when they're like, oh no, he went to the train station. They can only fit one person in the truck. I'm just like rolling my eyes, like, really? Like, that's like, dude, like, come on now. Like, you know, you got to know better. Like, you got to know, there's got to be some sort of ringing in your head that this is bad. But again, that would have helped, at least in Danny's case, if she should have said, you know what? We got to go. And he says, you can go, I'm staying. And then again, it's that thread pulling her back. Like, I need you. You're my life raft. You're the only thing that saved me from drowning. Then again, I understand that.
They kind of did it a little bit because once Simon and Connie, who were the other couple that were decided to get the fuck out but ended up being killed, that created a little bit of fervor about leaving. I mean, it's just not as strong in the theatrical version because Danny is like, I think we should go, and they sort of have like a modified version of that cut conversation where it's just like we have to stay, like this is so important. And instead what you get in the theatrical cut is sort of the community bringing her in and being like, oh, you want to leave, why would you want to leave? Her little conversation with Pele is part of that too, where he's just like, but if you really look at this, Danny, aren't we better for you than Christian? She sort of starts to get the sense of that a little bit, and that kind of it just distracts her. It sort of snaps her out of the sense of like, let me flee, where it's like she's in pain, she's in fear, and what the community is offering her is comfort where Christian never could have been able to do it. So that lulls her into a little bit of a state. Again, like the cutscene was a little too explanatory. It was a little too like right on the nose, which is not how Ari Aster movies tend to go. So I appreciated at least their rather like subtle way of being like, no, like you're in pain, like let us help you. And that kept her there. That was, I think that was more on brand for what the film was trying to sell.
Sure, I understand. I understood why she stayed. I just wish at some point they had acknowledged more overtly that like we need to go. Like because it seemed like they kept falling into all these situations and all these rituals and all these weird scenarios, and no one was kind of acknowledging like, is no one gonna say like how messed up this is? Like, I know they kind of said after the ritual suicide, but even then they're kind of like talk back and like no, like that's their choice. They want to do this. Like that's what we're here for. Like when we reach our end, this is considered a great honor to go out like that. And there's just so many moments where my logical thinking brain is just like, I don't care why you're telling me it happens. I'm gone. Like I'm good. Like, you know what I mean? It's like, I have my brain like, I'll sit in your house and when you offer me liver and onions, I might choke it down. But then when you're like, oh, by the way, our dessert is a shit sandwich and it's made with the best shit in the world. I'd be like, you know what? Bridge too far. I'm out.
You know what? Actually, I'm very allergic to eating shit, so I have to go. I really should go because even if it gets in the air, I get like sneezy in my eyes. I gotta go.
That's what I'm like. You know what? I'm good. Like I'm good. I'll be all right.
Damon, before. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
It just felt like there were so many moments where it's just like they're basically telling you you're going to eat a shit sandwich, and they're like, I can take a bite.
Right. Yeah, but very wisely, the beginning of the movie sets these people up as people who cannot read those signs. It's certainly like baked into those characters. Before we get to categories, Damon, I wanted to just talk about the horror aspect a little bit of this movie because it is technically a horror movie. On this second viewing, did you find the horror in, I would say more untraditional ways? Because I did. I found it to be a very dreadful movie without being overtly horrific.
I did. I saw an interview with Ari Aster as I was doing research for this movie. So I wanted to watch interviews from back then and see, because at that time, again, I was more just a moviegoer. I wasn't reading every interview with every movie I went and saw. And so I saw an interview with him, and like, I get why he did this. It still, but listen, it's an artistic choice. I just, again, as a horror fan, I wish we could have seen it more. He said that he wanted to make a breakup movie, but because it was set in the world of horror, there had to be horror elements. But the way he kind of rebelled against that ideology was that he had all the kills, all the gruesome moments kind of happen off screen in a way. Like, when Josh gets smacked in the head with the hammer, you see him getting dragged away in the blood, but we don't see exactly what happens after that. We don't see, is it Simon, the one character? Like, we see him when he's been carved up and put into this, ritualistic position after he's dead, but we don't see them do it to him. When we see Mark go off into the woods and then see somebody coming back literally wearing his face, we don't see that. And Ari Aster had said, like, that was my conscious decision to kind of like, almost like a middle finger to like, I have to make a horror movie, so I'm not going to give you the good parts. I'm going to make you not see the real atrocities getting carried out. You're going to see the aftermath. You're going to see little bits and pieces of it, but you're not going to literally see a guy carving off Mark's face. Was like his little bit of rebellion of this being a horror movie, but his version of a relationship breakup movie. That being said, I do agree with you. I did pick up on more of the subtleties this time, and the kind of like low level horror that happens, and the intricate ways they do it. I will say though, Patrick, artistic vision aside, it would have been. I think it would have been a better horror movie if they would have shown those parts. Certainly not critiquing Ari Aster for having his own artistic vision and saying,
Sure.
my way of rebelling against making this a traditional horror movie is I'm not going to show you the parts you want. I'm not going to show you the guy getting his face carved off. I'm going to show you the aftermath. Part of me is like, you know what? Because I hate these characters so much outside of Danny, I kind of wish I could have seen Mark getting
Apparently,
that's my only thing.
apparently, the original cut they turned in had those scenes, and they were going to get an NC-17 rating. I just read that. I don't know if that's true or not. I read that in some trivia that this was originally an NC-17 movie, and basically all the moments where you get to see what is happening to characters like Mark and Josh were done off screen. Or they chose to re-edit them as off screen because the on-screen version was too gory and violent, and they got an NC-17 rating for that. So I don't know how true that is, and everything that I read about the director's cut doesn't seem to go into that stuff. But also, I think that just what you're saying is that would have been an aside to Ari Aster anyway. He'd be like, "Oh yeah, like my 30-minute director version. You get into the relationship way more. You get into the thesis way more, which is what I learned." And I bet in the back of his brain's going, "Oh yeah, I should tell them that there's also like 7 minutes of more gore and violence, but I don't really care about that." I have a feeling like that's how his brain works, where he's like, "Yeah, there's another 30 minutes. It's all this story stuff. Oh, and the blood. Oh, and the blood. Yeah. The blood's in there too." But like, he doesn't really care. I think that's the thing. That's the thing that might piss off certain people about Ari Aster is that he likes horror, but like he doesn't care to deliver it to you in a traditional sense. Even though Hereditary, I think, is very horrific. His 4-hour version of Hereditary is a family drama. He says it himself. And I don't think he goes for like elevated horror at all. I think that's people put that title on guys like Ari Aster. They go, "Oh yes, he's elevated horror." Fuck you and your elevated horror. Horror is horror. Sometimes it's crazy, and sometimes it's like it's told in a certain way. And I think Ari Aster just likes to tell his shit the way he likes to tell it. But I'm with you. The beginning of this movie is rather dark and disturbing. The death of her sister and her parents is like, it's intense. It's that Ari Aster kind of uncomfortable, which you feel in Hereditary very much, where you're just like, oh, I shouldn't be looking at this. I shouldn't be seeing it from this angle. He's really good with that. I think we've talked about There's Something Strange with the Johnsons, which is one of his short films.
Yeah.
Just like 3 ways to fucked up. It's on YouTube. You can go check it out. It's not a horror film, but it's fucking horrific. Like, it's some fucking crazy. It's some fucking
Yeah. Yeah, and like I said, it's just that's a personal thing for me. Again, because I love horror. I like horror. Like, I want to see horror. And again, it's his artistic vision. I get it. Like, I understand it. And I also, like, when I read that interview with him where he said he did it kind of as a way to rebel against making a horror film. I'm not going to show you the horrific parts. Okay, I get it. I do. That's a more of a minor complaint of mine. More of like, I wish we could have seen that kind of thing. Like, if there's a director's cut, give me Mark getting his face chopped off. Give me, like, the aftermath of Josh in those moments, what happened to Simon and his girlfriend and things like that. Those just little things I wish we could have seen. Not because I'm like a gorehound or anything, but more just like it just adds to the horror of what they're going through. And I just think it would have been a little bit more effective. I don't really have a problem with the way he did it, and I do understand the subtleties of the horror, especially from the mental side of this film, where it's like psychological torture in a way.
Totally.
I understand all that, and so I appreciate that. Again, but I'm a horror junkie. I'd like to see Mark get his face chopped off. So, that's just me. Patrick, let's get into categories. We do have a lot to go through with this movie, and we're going to kick things off as we do each and every week here on the show. And we're going to go and kick things off with best performance. So, Patrick, when you go back on the rewatch, you had a chance to see this now for the second full time from start to finish. Who did you pick for best performance from Midsommar?
Well, I have a feeling we'll be talking about somebody else a lot, so I did divert on purpose, but also for a very good reason. My best performance goes to Jack Reynor as Christian. Now, Damon, I think we have agreed, whether we rewatch this movie or not, that the character of Christian is a fucking dipshit. Nobody likes him. Nobody likes him. I mean, his friends don't like him. His girlfriend doesn't like him, but she can't seem to cut him loose. But it all comes down to Jack Reynor's choices in this movie and what he does. And I appreciated his acting ability on another level this time around to portray somebody who is vile. I mean, he is a cowardly, apathetic snake, and not in like a conniving, like, smart way. He's slimy. He's slimy. He's weak, and he uses weak moves to fuck people over because he's a weakling, and he's like completely dialed his world to make it work for a weakling that doesn't have to push anybody, that doesn't have to punch anybody, that doesn't have to shove. He does it through this subtle manipulation and this ability to just not act, like his, and not literally acting, but like his inaction makes the other person move. He goes, I'm just going to stand here and be a douchebag until you do something. I was like, wow, like the layers that he could put on that. And sometimes it was facial expressions. Sometimes it was choices, like the very famous scene where he runs out of the yurt or whatever it is naked. He chose that as an actor. He said, like, we've had so many scenes where women are sexually humiliated. I think it's fair that I have that scene here. It wasn't going to be that way. He was going to be clothed. And he's like, no, I think I need to be naked and completely humiliated. Like, it's fair is fair. That was Jack Reynor making those choices. So this time around, I did have to give him the best performance because I really thought he did an incredible job being the worst possible person in this movie.
He really did, and it takes a talent when you don't become almost cartoonish in that way. When you become a mockery of the character you're actually trying to play. Like, you're so bad that it comes off inauthentic. And I think Jack Reynor did a really good job of reeling that in. And also, like, somehow this Christian guy is like the center of his friend group, which makes no sense because he's such a little weasel. And but everyone he's like the sun. Everyone just kind of circles around him. They're drawn to him for some reason, which says a lot about hhis friends group as well, I guess. And
totally
in a way as well. But yeah, his performance is really, really good. Like, he played an excellent shithill. Like, there was that, like, I genuinely disliked him, and that takes talent to make me genuinely dislike you, not dislike you to the point where I'm just like, I can't stand this character, get him off the screen. Like, everything he did was frustratingly good. So obviously I'm going the other route. But when you went this way, I knew what you were doing when you picked this guy, because when I got the categories, I was like, okay, well, let's just go ahead and start heaping praise on Florence Pugh, because Florence Pugh, her performance is utterly brilliant. She's so good in this, but she's so good now. I've not seen her do anything bad. Like, I didn't like Don't Worry, Darling. That was not one of my favorite films, but her performance was great. She's brilliant. She's such a great actor. And what really sold me on her performance this time around was going back to what I said about the opening of this movie, because I had kind of forgotten how horrific the death of her family was. I remembered it happened, but by the time I left the theater, I kind of colored my opinion in so many other ways. I forgot about the opening, which seemed like 4 lifetimes ago by the time the movie ended. Rewatching it this time and seeing the tragedy and seeing just the utter devastation that Danny deals with the death of her family. And at that point, she's so broken that she's just open to the power of suggestion. Like she just
Yeah.
wants, she's clinging to any sense of caring and longing for her. She doesn't care. And the fact that Christian doesn't care, but he's still throwing her a slight lifeline by being like, I half-heartedly invited her to go to Sweden with us because I couldn't fathom leaving her right now while she's going through this because that would make me look like a bad guy. He doesn't realize he's a bad guy. He's like, it'd make me look like a bad guy.
Right.
And then she accepts because she has no one else. She has nowhere else to go. So it's like, yeah, I need to cling on to you as my life raft. And her performance is so good. And then the ending, of course, like she's gone through all this and she goes through the entire trials and tribulations of this commune and the rituals and all this kind of stuff. And then at the end, she finally gets her comeuppance. She finally gets her chance to get back at Christian when she realizes, when she peeks through that door and sees him boning Maya, and she realizes what he's doing, not realizing what actually led to that, but you know, how it happened. And then when they give her that choice, they say, you can choose Christian or you can choose somebody else in the commune to sacrifice themselves in this final ritual. And sure enough, he's wearing that bear suit, man. He's getting set on fire because at that moment, even Florence Pugh is finally like, fuck this guy. And that end moment where she looks doped up and almost catatonic until she finally looks up and cracks that famous smile at the end of the movie where it's finally like, you're getting yours.
Yeah.
I thought it was brilliant.
She's a world-class actor. I mean, that just is the facts. And something that really stuck out to me this time was just how toxic she was because it was so easy the first time I watched it to go, yeah, fuck Christian. What a fucking piece of shit he is. To see the subtlety in her performance this time around, where it's like she throws just as much fuel on the fire as he does. He's just such a fucking coward. Like you're used to a stronger presence, and you go, why is this woman like chasing around this fucking earthworm? Like she doesn't fucking need him in her life at all. But with the tragedy, and boy, does she play that stuff incredibly well, incredibly well. But with the tragedy, she has to double down on him because there's nobody left. You feel the desperation throughout the film from that point on. It's like, he's all I have now. Now he's all I have. And then, but this community comes in and goes, hey, I think we have you too. Like, don't you want to be with us? She said something in an interview that I thought was really interesting. She goes, normally when I'm done with a character, I think, God, I left them in like a great place. Like they're good. Because, actors have relationships with the characters that they build. She goes, Danny is the one character that I'm still upset that I left her behind. She knows that smile at the end is not a good sign. It's not a good sign that you've been with somebody for 4 years and you happily watch them burn to death, even if they are a fucking asshole. As assholey as Christian was, she knows that like becoming the May Queen's not really a good thing. By the way, where's last year's May Queen? Because they talk about her. She ain't nowhere anymore. I haven't seen last year's May Queen. If I'm not mistaken, somebody correct me if they know out there. But she's the anchor of this movie. And I couldn't pick a better person than Florence Pugh to like bring us through it. Like she's killer, man. What more can I say, Damon?
Yeah, throw all the awards at her is all I'm saying. Like whatever she does, whatever she's doing, just throw awards at her. She's incredible.
Please.
So next category we're going to go into his favorite character, and I'm going to kick things off here, Patrick, because we used to do back in the day when we first started this podcast, we talk about this every now and again. I'm just bringing it up for reference sake. We used to do best and worst performance. And then over time, we kind of felt bad. We're like, you know what? It's not really fair to like single out a bad performance, even though a lot of it was kind of joking, tongue in cheek. We weren't trying to be cool or mean, but it just felt a little mean spirited to do worst performance. So we eliminated that and we added best character, favorite character. I'm going to do a throwback here, Patrick. Instead of doing best and worst performance, instead of picking my favorite character I'm picking is my least favorite character potentially ever in a movie, and that is Christian. And I said this about Jack Rayner's performance. Let me revisit that when I say that he played it so well that he sold it, that he was this utterly spineless douchebag. Everything he says, everything he does, every action he takes in this movie makes me want to punch him in the face. And that's why I'm saying he's my favorite character to hate. And I'm saying that in a good way, because we've done reviews on this show, Patrick, many times where we talk about the flaws of the characters, where they're just we're so indifferent to them that we're just like, I don't care if you live or die. Like, I just don't care. Like, I don't.
Right.
That's a problem. That's a real problem when I watch a horror movie and I just don't care. Like, I just don't care whether you live. I don't care whether you die. I just don't care about you. That's bad. That's really bad. In this film, for all the ways I was telling these characters, you should know better. There's red flags. There's a red flag. There's a red flag. Get the fuck out. Somewhere deep in the recesses of my fractured, broken mind, my tortured horror mind, Patrick, I was like, boy, I can't wait for that guy to get in the bear suit and get burnt alive. And there's something special about that kind of a character, that you can despise them so much that you're just like wishing everything bad to happen to them. You want them to get hacked you want them to get chopped in half by Jason. You want them to get sliced by Freddy. You want them to get tortured and die. And that sounds terrible, but that's why I picked him as my favorite character to hate. Not because I didn't hate the performance. Jack Rayner was brilliant. I loved it. As I said, he was incredible. But that's why, because he sold it so well. Like when I was done watching it, like that's what I texted you right away. I was like, God, I forgot what a shit person Christian was. My God, like I just kind of glanced over that from like a 4-year absence, how much I hated this guy. So that's why he's my favorite character, because I absolutely hated him.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I got nothing else to add. I mean, he was my best performance. It's for a reason.
So what about you, Patrick? What did you pick for favorite? Did you actually have a favorite character?
I did, actually. And this time around, my favorite character was Pele, because earlier I said I realized like Pele's the true villain of the movie and they are all his victims. But how this character goes about, selecting his victims and then keeping them in the web was I appreciated it on a whole new level, and that could only have come from a second viewing. That it really could have, and so even like in the scene where Christian invites her to Sweden, like you watch how he acts versus how everybody else acts, and then when they're actually there, and he kind of pressures them into taking the mushroom teas or the psychedelics and all that stuff. He's constantly keeping pressure on them. He's making sure they stay. It's his job to keep them there as a sacrifice. That's what he's out to do. And I appreciated that on a whole new level this time.
Yeah, he was a good character, and I did realize more of how he was the villain this time around than I saw this first. Like, obviously, I knew he was the one who drew them into this, and he brought them there to be sacrificed, but I kind of understood more of the subtleties this time watching him and how manipulative he was. Like, he was really manipulative, and you kind of see, and a lot of this movie, they tell you, like, again, this is one of those things you pick up on the second viewing. Like, they're telling you in the movie, they're like, we send people out into the world to bring people back. Like, they say it. They flat out
say it out loud.
And they're just like, everyone's like, oh, okay, cool. Like, and I'm just like, do not see what's happening here. But Pele is so manipulative that, yeah, he was great. He was a good character, and I definitely picked up on more of his subtleties in the second time around, certainly, than I did the first time around. Let's talk about best line, because this is, of course, it's an Ari Aster movie. There is a lot of dialogue in here, and there's definitely some interesting lines. So, Patrick, why don't you set up your best line from Midsommar?
My best line comes off the heels of just what you're talking about. There, at one point, Christian is being coaxed into drinking this drink, and he doesn't really want to, but she tells him, like, you should drink it. And I just thought, I was like, this is the perfect little encapsulation of like why these victims are going to die, why these people are going to kick the bucket, because They couldn't have been more direct in this moment.
What does it do?
Oh, it breaks down your defenses and opens you for the influence.
Okay. Thanks.
You're welcome.
So what he says right before that is like, hey, you know what? I think I don't really want to like take anything right now that'll like impair me. And then he asks what's in it, and she says, if you can't hear it, it breaks down your defenses and opens you for the influence. So basically he's like, hey, I don't want to be influenced by anything. And she goes, drink this, it'll influence you. And of course he just fucking takes it because he's a coward. He couldn't possibly stand his ground. He wouldn't do that. So he takes it, and I was like, oh, that is the scene that explains why the fuck they didn't run out of here after those people smashed their faces on the rocks.
Yeah, no, you're right. You're absolutely right. Yeah, in that moment, I'm just like, why would you not run? Like, why would you not just like pour it on the ground, fake it, something?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty. That's where it gets a little bit more overtly in your face that they're making really dumb decisions. As these characters are just like, good God, didn't you figure it out by now, man? So my favorite line actually comes from the moment when somebody finally tells Christian he's a piece of shit, and that comes from the scene when when he shows back up in the sleeping quarters, and he tells Josh, "Hey man, I know you're doing your thesis on the Midsummer rituals, but I'm gonna do mine on this particular Midsummer ritual. So that's what I'm doing my thesis on." And he's such an unconscionable prick in that moment that I'm just like, because I know, like, when I did my senior thesis in English literature, like, I know if somebody came up and said that to me, they would have been punched immediately. Like, I worked really hard on coming up with an idea and what I was going to write my senior thesis on. I would have raged in that moment. I would have been like, oh, cool, you're doing the same thing. Sweet. Hold on 1 second. And then just absolutely blasted them. And so Josh doesn't go that far, but he finally tells Christian what a piece of shit he is.
Do you think I don't know what you're doing is actually kind of outrageously unsubtle? The fact that you're being this bald about it, I'm honestly kind of impressed.
What the fuck, man? What does that mean?
What the fuck? This is what I've been working toward, and you know it. That's why you look so guilty right now, because you know that what you're doing is unethical and leechy and lazy, and frankly, it's kind of sad.
That line defines Christian. Frankly, it's kind of sad. That's like he finally, like, the one person in this movie that tells Christian that he's a POS. Finally tells him. He's just like, it's kind of leechy, it's kind of, it's pathetic, and it's kind of sad. Like, that's him. That's Christian. That's his character.
Yeah, that's exactly who he is. And it is very satisfying that someone just says directly to him who he is at least once in the movie. That it finally gets, that's the straw that broke the back right there. Is like, Josh is like, I've been fucking working on this for a long ass time, and you're just going to swoop it out from under me? Fucking bullshit, like, and here's why. It's great.
Yeah, it's the scene that I love the best when I'm finally like, I'm sitting there going, finally, somebody actually tells this guy what a POS he is. Let's go to best gore, and let me go ahead and spoil the lead here, Patrick, because this is the best gore. I'm not going to sit here and think there's another scene. So talk about best gore, and then we'll talk about the best gore.
I mean, really, I call it hammer to the face because I think if you've watched this movie, you watch somebody take a giant wooden mallet and smash somebody's face into pulp. But truth be told, the whole ritualistic suicide scene at the compound is just genuinely horrific. Like, the first woman jumps down, and as she hits the rock, like as she reels back from the impact, you see that her face is no more. And then the guy misses and isn't quite dead. So they go over and hammer him in the face for good measure, just to make sure his face is completely destroyed. It's the kind of gore that you're looking for in the most hardcore of horror films. They deliver it to you in this weird, subtle folk horror here.
it's the way that I wanted to see Mark's face getting chopped off. Like that is the scene where, and you know what? I do remember for all the little irritations I had watching this movie the first time around 4 years ago. I do remember in that scene, as soon as they went to that cliff, I was like, "Oh, these people are killing themselves. Like this is
Yeah.
a ritual." I knew it, ritualistic suicide. Like I knew that's what was happening. I was like, "Oh, you're about to be real shocked when they jump off that cliff," and sure enough, they did. Now, to their credit, I didn't necessarily see the guy missing and then getting his face smashed in with the giant hammer, the giant wooden mallet. So that was a good surprise and definitely the best score in this movie because boy, do they get up close shots on that mallet smashing down his face, and then you see the look on Christian and Danny and their faces going, "What the fuck?"
Oh shit.
Yeah, and I love what I again. These are moments in the movie where again just that moment alone would have been like, all right, where's the keys? I'm getting out. Like I'm out, and I understand, but the way they explain it to them, and they're all just like, oh, okay. They're like, this is a great honor. When we turn, when we're 56 to 72, we're mentors. At 72, it's a great honor to go out like this. And they're all, and everyone's like, oh, all right, like I guess, like I kind of get it, and like that's one of the ones where I'm just like in my mind, like, dude, steal the car, run, just run.
Yeah.
As soon as you see people getting ritualistic suicide, everyone's cheering for it. Get out, like that should be your first. That should be your biggest clue ever that you should not be here right now. But the way they explained it to me, I was kind of laughing this time around when they're just like, oh no, oh, it's fine, it's
very European.
It's totally cool.
Very European, man. I got to tell you, I've spent enough time in Europe to go, yeah, that's about right. That's about how they react.
I love it's just so like they're all so cool and calm about it. They're like, don't worry about it. They're just dead. Don't worry about it. It's all good.
Don't worry about that. I just smashed a guy's face in with a giant wooden mallet in front of you. He wanted that.
I do appreciate Mark's line after that because he took a nap, and when they come back and they're telling him about it, and he's like, oh man, why did you wake me up?
Yeah, Mark, fucking douche.
Like that's where I was like, yeah, that's that guy. He's like, why not to see someone get their face bashed in by a giant wooden mallet? Let's talk this. Can you introduce this next category, the best good for her film? Can you introduce this one? This was your idea, and I like this idea.
Yeah, like I said earlier, that Midsommar sort of kicked off the idea that there is indeed a good for her genre. Now, and it doesn't even necessarily need to be horror, but in this case, I asked what is the best good for her horror film. I did want to do a horror film specifically, and because I think I think the final girl trope is not necessarily beloved necessarily. It's just we all know that it's there. And the good for her trope is a little bit different. The woman isn't covered in blood and screaming and running for her life, and we're just happy that she got away. No. The good for her horror film instead says we're not doing that trope. We are going to see this woman get a chance to live her best life. That's what's in the next chapter potentially for her. And so I chose for my favorite good for her horror film is The Witch, starring Anya Taylor-Joy. Fantastic movie by Robert Eggers. Really, really good. I know you like it as well. She was living a miserable life as essentially a pilgrim, and she was part of a religiously extreme family that basically hated her. And the minute that she got her period, they were like, "Oh, fuck her. She's got to go." Her mom was awful to her. Her dad was just this terrible zealot. She was living a miserable life in a hut in the woods in the 1600s or something like that. And at the end, she signs a little paper. The devil comes up and is like, "Hey man, you want to have a good fucking time for the rest of your life?" She gets naked. She goes into the woods. She flies up into the air, and she's going to have a fucking grand old time being a witch the rest of her life. I was like, good for her.
Yeah, it's a movie where you feel terrible for her the entire time. The family blames her for what happens to the kid. They got booted out of their ultra religious community, so now they've been ostracized and they're on their own. Yet they're still incredibly tied to these religious beliefs. And they treat her like crap. Like they treat her like crap the entire movie, and she finally kind of fights back against that notion of like, this is just going to be my life. And she kind of takes it back from them. And, you know, they all, you know, die horrifically and everything. But yeah, that's kind of the point of like, I'm taking my own life. I'm taking my own path. I'm seeing my own vision through. I love The Witch. I think it's great. I like Robert Eggers. But by the way, Robert Eggers has Nosferatu remake coming out next year. I am super excited about that.
Way into that. I'm sure you'll be hearing about that on this podcast.
Absolutely. So I want to mention two good for her films that are not horror, just to mention them because I do like this genre. I'm a big revenge movie fan. I think I mentioned that on the show before. Away from horror, I just love revenge movies. Like, I'm way into those movies. Kill Bill, you know, stands near the top of that list of great, good for her movies where she gets back at the people who got her. Uma Thurman, brilliant. Two movies, great. Quentin Tarantino, I love those movies. So that's a non-horror version, although there's a lot of blood in that movie. So that. And I would also mention there is on this list a movie called Promising Young Woman, which is utterly disturbing. It's a movie that I don't know that I could ever watch again because there's one really, really bad scene that's really hard to watch. It's hard to watch.
Yeah.
But the ending is really cathartic. The ending is just like, finally, she gets it. You know, she gets her revenge. And so, like, I really do enjoy that. But those are not horror movies. So my choice for the best good for her moment in a horror film, best good for her film, is weirdly a movie I kind of compared this to a little bit coming out of it about Danny and that final moment when she's just like, yeah, Christian, you can burn alive. It's Samara Weaving in Ready or Not. That is a movie that is set up for her to be a final girl in terms of she is supposed to be the sacrificial lamb for her new husband's family to survive this curse that's been placed upon them where they find great success and riches, but they have to sacrifice somebody every year for this prosperity to continue. And this year, she is the sacrifice. Yet she does not go quietly into the night. She seeks a revenge on all of them while surviving on her own. And then in the end, very much like this movie, when it reaches dawn and she hasn't died, she survived, and the entire family literally just explodes. One of my more favorite scenes in horror history, in recent horror history. So I was Ready or Not. I really love Samara Weaving in that role, and I really liked her way of fighting back in that movie.
And you know that Ready or Not's not one of my favorite movies. I wasn't big on the self-aware humor in that movie. It just didn't work for me. But it was a quality made movie, and I think why this movie is a good for her movie as opposed to a standard final girl, because she is covered in blood at the end. What does she do at the end? She goes outside, she lights a cigarette, she fucking hangs out. She's she's nonplussed. She's like, wow, I just got out of what could have been a terrible relationship. Like, cool, good for me. Like, you know what I mean? Like, there was a satisfaction on her face at the end, whereas you could have easily gone with just the shaken and broken woman. They didn't do that. She went with like basically it's what this is. I just got out of a toxic relationship. Yeah. I just got out of something that was going to be really bad for me. Thank goodness. We come out with scars. We come out with a little bit of pain. That's everybody. But I got out and I'm not going to fucking cry about it. Like that. I appreciated that part of the movie.
Yeah. And that's very much who she is in that movie. She's just like, damn, I made it.
Yeah. Yeah. Like she's proud of herself in that moment. That's good for her.
Yeah, smoke him if you got him. Like she's like, I'm going out
right.
in terms. All right, Patrick. Let's talk about one of our favorite categories on the show, which is remake, sequel, or leave it alone. And it's pretty self-explanatory, but I'll say it anyways. This is the category where we take whatever movie we're reviewing and we basically say, should they remake it, should they give it a sequel, or should they just leave it alone? So when it comes to Midsommar, upon your second full viewing, Patrick, remake, sequel, or leave it alone?
Truth be told, Damon, I'm very comfortable saying leave it alone. I actually will probably seek out the director's cut at some point, probably not tomorrow, but I don't need this movie to be anything else. I don't think a sequel would serve this anything at all, like Return of the May Queen or anything like that. Like, I don't know. It would feel like a weird cash grab. And I don't see a need to remake it because I think it's very uniquely like Ari Aster's brain kind of working things out. Obviously, he was very vulnerable in how he depicted himself in a relationship, which, like, if he's any part Christian or any part Danny, like, doesn't make him look good necessarily. So it's like to remake that would kind of change that dynamic of it. So I say leave it alone.
So I'm Mike, because we have the three choices here, I have to go with the one that would make the most sense based on the choices I'm making here, which is I'm going to say remake. And not because I think you need to remake the film. I just want a different cut of this movie. And I know you said director's cut. I haven't seen the director's cut. I don't know what all goes into that. But the scene you told me, the deleted scene that we didn't get, that I said would have made a vast amount of difference, in my opinion, because at least one person would have said, we need to go, in a more overt way, would have made a big difference, that they see the red flags. They see the signs that this is not a good situation. But also, again, this is just my personal preference. I would have liked to have seen the horror. Like, I would have liked to have seen Mark get lured into the woods, killed, and his face get chopped off. I would have liked to have seen what exactly happened to Simon and his girlfriend. I would have liked to have seen what exactly, I mean, did they just drag Josh off and he's dead? Like, we find his leg planted later in the movie. Like, we see his leg sticking out of a garden. Was it just we buried him there? Like, what the hell's going on here? Did they chop him up? Like, what happened? As a gruesome horror fan and as a guy who, loved Terrifier 2, I would have enjoyed a little bit more horror. I would have enjoyed a little bit more. So when I say remake, I don't mean remake in the sense of let's let somebody else tackle this movie. More of just like, I wish Ari Aster had given me a few more things that I would have made a difference in me enjoying this movie a little bit more the first time around. The horror elements, again, his choice. I understand why he did it. If it really was, I didn't really want to make a horror film, so this is my way of rebelling. I get it. I do. I understand that, and I appreciate. When I say petty, I don't mean pettiness like he's a petty guy, but like I'm like, you know what? I appreciate that level of like, you know what? You
Good for him.
Film? I'm going to make my horror film. So I appreciate that. But me as the viewer, I'm like, I could have done with a little bit more. I could have done with a little bit more horror. And again, that one scene you mentioned, now I'm going to seek it out today to watch it and be frustrated that it wasn't in the movie, because it sounds like exactly what I want. I wanted them to acknowledge the situation that they were in, because they just all seem so oblivious to it. So yeah, so I say remake, but not just a recut is a better way of saying it.
This is a shocking turn of events. Damon started before this podcast as fuck Midsommar and fuck the director's cut because there can't be more of it, to I'd like to see that director's cut. Incredible turn of events.
Yeah, my initial reaction after seeing this movie and then like 6 months later hearing there's a director's cut, my initial reaction was, there's more? More of this? Like, that's the idea? We're going to stack on another half hour of this movie? Yeah, I just, like I said, I won't even call it the direct, I'll just call it the Damon cut of this movie. Like, I want the horror because, truth be told, I like horror, but also, man, it would feel good to see these characters get theirs, man. Like, Josh was not, I guess I'm basing the terrible characters mostly around Mark and Christian, because Josh didn't seem like a wholly terrible person.
Yeah.
At least
he committed some sins, but it wasn't like, you knew why he was doing it,
Yeah. And he didn't seem like, but he, even in the beginning, like he was kind of, casually cruel to Danny in a little way. Like he's just
totally.
But again, he was there for a purpose. He was there to do his thesis. He wasn't really worried about going there and having a good time, or he wasn't Mark just like, hey man, I'm going to get some ass while I'm in Sweden. And then, of course, Christian steals his idea. So yeah, like just that little things like that again. But I would have liked to have seen them get theirs. And again, just because I like the horror elements. And as I said, just stick that one scene. I wish I would have seen Danny say, we got to go. And then we understand why she stays. And you explaining it, I'm like, yeah, makes total sense.
Yeah. Well, hey, Damon, he's going to watch Midsommar again, folks. This is a victory for all elevated horror fuckwits out there.
I wish I could explain it. Like I said, I do like there are certain movies, and you know this, there are certain movies that you have to experience a few times to appreciate. And I know this is not a horror film, but I've said it on this show many times, and I'll use it again here. When I saw The Big Lebowski for the first time, and everyone said this is the funniest movie you will ever see. It is so funny. I watched it, and I got done watching it. I didn't see it in the theater. I saw it at home. And I was like, that wasn't funny. That was stupid. Like, I don't get the humor. It didn't really make any sense to me. And then somehow, somewhere along the way, it was on cable, and I watched it again, and I watched it again. And I've now seen The Big Lebowski like 30 times, and I quote that movie all the time, and it's one of my favorite comedies of all time. I love the Coen brothers in general, but I was like, this is utterly brilliant. I love this movie, and yeah, it's great. But it took me seeing it 2 or 3 times. It wasn't like when I saw The Hangover in the theater and I saw it for the first time, like I just laughed my ass off. That movie, I just didn't get the humor at the time, the stoner humor of it all. When I saw it a couple, 3 times, I was like, all right, I get it now. And now, 30 times later, it's one of my favorite movies. I don't know that I'm going to sit down and watch Midsommar 30 times. And I do think a big part of the reason why I walked away frustrated the first time and then just never wanted to revisit it was the length. I mean, I think that played a big part in it because it is a real commitment to sit down and watch a 2.5-hour movie, especially when you watch it the first time and you didn't enjoy it.
Totally.
Then it just feels like it's like self-torture. Like, why am I going to sit down and watch a movie I know I didn't like and it's 2.5 hours long? Like,
no shit.
Why would it? So I had no reason to revisit this. I just never had, like, I just had such a bad taste in my mouth leaving that movie the first time that I was like, why would I want to put myself through that again? Like, if it was I'm not saying I would have ran back in an hour and a half, but at least then I would have been like, well, I can sacrifice 90 minutes. 2.5 hours is a real commitment to a movie. Like, we're talking like Godfather length, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And this movie was not the Godfather to me. I was not like, boy, can I wait to see this again.
I mean, I had very little hope that your mind was going to change. But when I rewatched it, I go, he's going to see that there is something to this movie. He's going to have to see it. But I was like, I know Damon. He's still pissed off about the first time he's seen this movie. That's a long time ago, and he's still mad. like how are we going to get through it? So I'm pleasantly surprised that it did turn for you a little bit, and you're like, hey, you know what? I might actually want to see a little bit more of this.
Well, it's also, I think it's fair, like when we talked about Hereditary, when we did that review, like when I saw that the first time in the theater, I immediately enjoyed it. Like, it was a good movie, but it did take me seeing it a few times to really understand all the nuance and subtleties that Ari Aster had packed into that movie that I didn't pick up on the first time, because Hereditary is a more obvious horror film.
Sure.
So I really picked up on the horror elements. Of course, I understood the story and I understood the ending, all that, but just the little subtleties, little nuances he shoved in there as well, I didn't pick up on until seeing it a second, third, fourth time. By the time we reviewed it, I think we reviewed it last year, or was it earlier this year? We reviewed it whenever we reviewed it.
Hard to say.
When we reviewed it, I still loved it, but I picked up on a lot of the other things that I didn't necessarily see before. But again, I think that's the thing with this film. The way that Ari Aster rebelled against making a horror film by taking a lot of the horror out of it took away what I liked about Hereditary. Hereditary was a pretty obvious horror film with a lot. It's a family drama underlying it all. Like you said, the 4-hour cut is more of a family drama. It's not really horror. But the references in horror were so much more obvious in that movie. If Midsommar had that, if I did see Mark get his face chopped off, if I did see what happened to Simon and his girlfriend, things like that, I think I would have walked away and been like, damn, that was pretty brutal.
Yeah.
I'm not saying I would have loved it, but I would have said, I see the horror.
Sure.
If they took the horror out of it, then I'm stuck with a 2.5-hour movie of bad choices and terrible characters. Not terrible in like the written. I'm saying like
right.
Characters I hate.
Characters you hate making decisions you hate.
Yeah, so it took a second viewing to be like, okay, I still hate them. Like they're still terrible people,
Yep.
but I'm happy what happened to them, but there's again, I still do bump up against some of the choices. That's my biggest, if I had one major criticism that stayed from my first viewing to now, it's that. And I understand like what you said, like that's these characters. I get it. I do. Especially Christian because he is such a weasel. Like he's such a coward that he can't just be like, no, I'm not going to drink the psychedelic tea. And yeah, Danny, we're breaking up and you're not going to Sweden with me because he's too much of a coward to do that. I understand. Like I understand his choices better. And I understand Mark is like the douchebag frat boy a little bit, but still there's got to be a couple moments in there, and Danny especially, because Danny, for all the toxic ways she's attached to Christian, she still seemed like a pretty smart person, and that like she never really raised the moment where she's like, she did say it, like I know
She
said
did, yeah.
it, but like they talk her out of it rather easily, you know, and like. And that's conversation with her and Pele and her and the other, you know, she doesn't really have that full intent conversation with the other people in her group, and I wish we would have seen that scene. But yeah, I still have an issue with some of the choices that are made. But yeah, I get a lot of the subtleties and the nuances in this film that I didn't pick up on the first time. Still doesn't need to be 2.5 hours long. I think you can cut a half hour out of this. I think it'd still be good.
Apparently, Ari Aster still hears that from people. Like, oh, it's good. It could be shorter. And he's like, it used to be way longer.
I mean, everything Ari Aster does, apparently. Like, isn't Beau is Afraid like 4 hours long or whatever? So
Beau is Afraid is just at the 3-hour mark, I think. I love that movie. I thought it was great. It's not a horror movie. It's nothing like any of these movies at all. It's a surrealist film.
Yeah, I just like when movies are long, I don't have a problem with long movies when they're well done. You know what I mean? Like I saw Avengers Endgame in the theater like 3 times. That was the end of an era for that movie, and I was like, oh my god, 3 hours just blew by, and that's a totally different movie. I understand. People complained about The Irishman. The Irishman was way too long. I didn't like. I loved it. It didn't bother me at all. Killers of the Flower Moon, same thing. Like, oh, it's 3 hours or 3.5 hours. Okay. Hateful Eight didn't bother me at all. That it was 3.5 hours long. There's a director's cut. I watched that. It's like 5 hours long, whatever it is. Didn't bother me. Didn't bug me at all. But there are definitely movies that, like, kind of like going back to Terrifier 2. We did our Terrifier 2 review. Probably one of your biggest complaints about that movie was like it did not need to be 2.5 hours long.
I think that's like my only complaint is that it just didn't need to be as long as it was.
Yeah, and that's still, like I said, my 2 major complaints about Midsommar. One, the choices, because I do think there's still some really obvious moments where you could have been like, even if you don't leave, you could at least acknowledge like we need to go. And then 2 would be it does feel some of the rituals, and I understand like what you said about he's putting you in the situation of these dumb Americans and they don't know really what's happening, but I get the point, and I don't need a 5-minute scene of it to tell me that. 2 minutes 2 minutes would suffice, and I'd still get the same point.
Fair enough.
So, but hey, I walked away with Midsommar. I walked away a much more positive attitude, Patrick.
Shocked. I'm genuinely. I mean, on that note, Damon, like how on earth could we, how on earth could we make this podcast any crazier with that twist ending?
I know, right? So our final category, as always, which is it scary? So Patrick, at the end of the day, Midsommar, is it scary?
It's an Ari Aster movie, so on a traditional sense, it's it has a little bit of blood and guts, but it's not really a scary movie. But it is dreadful. It's the relationship's dreadful. That makes you feel sick watching the two of them interact. What happens to Danny with regards to her family and her sister and all that? Terrifying, like just dark and nasty on a very grounded level. So that scares you kind of at your core. And then the environment that they're in at the commune, despite the fact that it's a bright, sunny summer in the middle of June in Sweden with a bunch of happy-go-lucky Swedes, there is this air of something being very wrong. And so while the scares are not traditionally there, the dread is just, it's almost like relentless, the dread in this movie.
Yeah, I would agree, and I will argue that it is scary on some level, and I would use the word, which it sounds like I'm using the same word as scary, but it's not. It's a horrific movie. Like there's horrific moments in this movie where you're just like, I need to get out of here. Like, I need to leave. I can't. This is uncomfortable to watch this happen
Yeah.
to people. Even though I hate them, I'm still like, this is uncomfortable to watch. And as you said, the dread it's just dripping with dread. And so, yeah, it's scary in that regard, and it's disturbing. Like, that's another word. Horrific and disturbing would be two words I would use to describe this movie. It is not traditional in the sense of I'm going to be jumping out of my seat, or, you know, it's horrific like watching Terrifier 2 when, you know, you're literally skinning a person. Like, that's not,
Right.
it's just a different kind of horror, but it is horrific and it is terrifying in that way, especially when you understand the nuances of these characters and how just bad they are for each other. And so, yeah, like it is a good scary movie in that way. It just, I can't believe I'm saying this, Pat. God, I can't believe these words are about to come out of my mouth. You need to see this movie a couple times to appreciate it, because I didn't. One time was more than enough for me, where I was like, nope, I'm good. I saw it once. I never need to see it again. And then because for the however long we've been doing this podcast, Patrick, every great now and again, you'll throw it out there like, we need to review Midsommar. We need to do it. I'm just like, dude, I can't put myself through it. And then we had this little lull at the end of the year where there's not a lot of new films coming out, reviewed Thanksgiving, and then we have kind of a break until I think Night Swim that comes out in January. We started pitching ideas like, what should we review? We got our best of episode, of course, coming out at the end of the year. We are going to do that. Got this idea, that idea, and we're like, Midsommar, we can finally do it. Let's go to therapy. And
I'm glad we did.
Much like therapy, Patrick, and much like everyone should be brave enough to tackle their mental health because it is a real issue, I finally did. And the catharsis I feel now is that I came out on the other side, I survived it, and I didn't dislike it. This is a movie I would rewatch again. I can't believe I'm saying that. I would rewatch this again.
Damon, I was the May Queen at the start, and I take off my flower crown and I give it to you. You are now our May Queen for the next year.
I'm stunned. When I got done with it, because I was even during the movie, there were moments in the movie when I was watching, I was like, God, this is so long. But when it was over, I was like, you know what? That wasn't bad. That wasn't
nice.
I was like, I didn't say a word to you either. I was like, I want you to be shocked and stunned when I tell you how I felt about this movie.
I didn't know if we were coming in with this like grand revelation that you liked it, or you were going to like triple down on fuck this movie. I was like, what are we getting today? So I'm pleasantly surprised, because we want to like more movies than we want to hate. So there it is.
Yeah. So next movie we're going to review is called 30 Miles from Nowhere.
No, we're not. We already did that. That's unfair, because we already did it for the show. We can't do it again.
We're going to continue tackling movies that we both hated. So let's go into that one. No, I'm joking. I will tell you this though, Patrick. I did revisit Midsommar, because when I saw it the first time, I just saw it as a regular casual moviegoer. And I do appreciate, since we've been doing this podcast, I always use the word critical eye. I do watch things with a critical eye, and I can appreciate them in a different way than I used to. I will never revisit Halloween Ends. You can't. I'm not going to do it. I don't care. There's no nuance to that movie. I got the nuance he was going for, and the movie still sucked. So don't.
Let's talk about it in about 4 years and see how it goes.
There's no version of this world where I'm gonna be like, you know what, I really can't wait to see that again. No, that's a more obvious horror film than this one, and that there's no subtlety in that. I know what that film's about, and it just pisses me off.
If you are Danny and our new May Queen, indeed, Halloween Ends is your Christian, and you guys should not be together.
Yeah, David Gordon Green, you're going in that bear suit. Get in there, David Gordon Green.
Now that is you and him might need to come together and have a discussion, but you don't need to revisit that movie.
Yeah, that's true. I don't need to go back to that one. All right, that is our show for this week. Our podcast didn't go as long as Midsommar. I'm actually impressed by that. Thankfully. Want to say a big thank you as always to everyone that tunes into the show. We appreciate it. Obviously, Midsommar, I know right now it's available on Amazon Prime is where I watch it. I think it's available a couple other places as well. But I know it's on Amazon Prime Video for sure, for streaming for free if you have Amazon Prime. That's where I watched it. So check out Midsommar. I can't believe I'm saying this. Check out Midsommar. And if you have seen it, don't be afraid to revisit it, because there was no bigger critic of that movie than this guy sitting right here. And yet I came out on the other side saying, you know what? It wasn't that bad. And that's not something I would have, that's definitely not something I would have said 2 weeks ago. So here we are. Big thank you, as always, to everyone that tunes in. Make sure you check us out on all your favorite podcast platforms, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and, of course, over on our YouTube channel. Just search Rewind of the Living Dead. Please subscribe. We're still building out our YouTube channel, so please check us out over there and subscribe to us there. You can actually see our reactions as much as you can hear them on the podcast. You got questions, comments, movies you'd like us to review, please don't throw out Bo's Afraid. I don't think I can go through that. But it's not really a horror movie. Send us your questions, send us your comments, hit us up on social media. Just search Rewind of the Living Dead on Twitter/X, Facebook, and Instagram. And you can also send us an email at rotlivingdead@gmail.com. That's rotlivingdead@gmail.com. And you can also and always hit us up on our own personal social media channels. I am at Damon Martin, and you are?
At Director Patrick.
And a big thank you, as always, for everyone that tunes in each and every week to the show. We'll be back next week with another edition of Rewind of the Living Dead. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you then.
Peace.